This is the World Organic News for the week ending 25th of February 2019. John Moore reporting. Decarbonise the air, recarbonise the soil. Just a quick note to let you know one of our neighbours is weaning calves at present, and they are incredibly loud. So if some of that seeps into the audio, I do apologise in advance. So we begin this week with a piece entitled How Factory Farming Contributes to Global Warming from EcoWatch. Quote, when you add it all up, the picture is clear. Contemporary agriculture is burning up our planet, and factory farms, or, in the industry lingo, confined animal feeding operations, CAFOs, play a key role in this impending disaster. Then the piece talks about fossil fuel extraction and so on. And then from further down the piece, today nearly 65 billion animals worldwide, including cows, chickens and pigs, are crammed into CAFOs. These animals are literally imprisoned and tortured in unhealthy, unsanitary and unconscionably cruel conditions. Sickness is the norm for animals who are confined rather than pastured, and who eat GMO corn and soya beans rather than grass and forage as nature intended. Or as they evolved, I would say. Anyway, to prevent the inevitable spread of disease from stress, overcrowding and lack of vitamin D, animals fed a steady diet of antibiotics. These antibiotics pose a threat to the environment when they run off into the lakes, rivers, aquifers and drinking water. End quote. The inhumanity of these setups is reason alone to shut them down. The antibiotic resistance they are creating is a time bomb waiting for a trigger, and we have just been incredibly lucky so far not to have a major outbreak of antibiotic-resistant disease. The groundwater contamination will take generations to repair. On the odd occasion, manure lakes in some of the less well-regulated areas give way, and it is as catastrophic as you would imagine. The arguments for these industrial units is the cheapness of the food. Having spent some time in the US last year, not being a cheese eater, or an eater of any sauce for that matter, I actually tasted the meat without adornment, and it is the most bland meat I've ever eaten. As bland as any mass-produced food, so this shouldn't be a surprise. Now, because of this and the huge cheese mountain back in the 1980s, the US Department of Agriculture developed new ways for the food industry to add more cheese to its products. The industry and consumers, it appears, leapt at this, and the huge amounts of food containing cheese is mind-boggling. I can eat all dairy products except cheese. It leads to stomach cramps and other unpleasantness. And it is for this reason I can assure you there is cheese in so many processed foods. The answer, of course, is whole foods and grow your own, but that's a different episode. The point I'm making eventually is that the cheapness of food is offset by the use of excessive flavourings linked to heart disease, obesity and so on. The true cost of feedlot beef is way beyond the price at the supermarket, but healthcare is not included in the price of the meat, so we have at least one hidden cost. There are even more troubling issues. Quote from the same piece. CAFOs contribute directly to global warming by releasing vast amounts of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, more than the entire global transport industry. The air at some factory farm sites tested in the US is dirtier than America's most polluted cities, according to the Environmental Integrity Project. According to a 2006 report by the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, the FAO, animal agriculture is responsible for 18% of all human-induced greenhouse gas emissions, including 37% of methane emissions and 65% of nitrous oxide emissions. The methane releases from billions of imprisoned animals on factory farms are 70 times more damaging per tonne to the Earth's atmosphere than CO2, end quote. Toss in the transport of feed in and cattle out, and the climate change impact grows further. Numbers quoted are mind-bogglingly worrying, all because it's cheaper, in inverted commas, to treat animals humanely for profit. The argument for CAFO is that animals waste energy walking around to find feed. If the little buggers had just stood still, all the feed would be converted into two things. One, keeping them alive, and two, growing meat quickly. As I mentioned above, one of the side effects of this is bland, flavourless meat. To me, this convert walking energy into meat production seems a fallacy. We aren't working with machines, but with living beasts. This way is not sustainable ethically, environmentally, and when the legal action eventually kicks in, financially. But I hear you ask, is there a system that could replace feedlots? I'm so glad you asked. From the site mattersoftrust.org, quote, "The really good news is that we've already found a solution that addresses virtually all of these problems. Doesn't matter if you believe climate change is an issue worth your consideration or not. Doesn't matter whether you believe water shortages are a pressing concern, or whether you care about preserving our butterfly, bee or fish populations. Even if you care about just one of these many issues and poo-poo all the rest, your time, money and effort is best spent by supporting regenerative farming. The reason for this is because regenerative farming helps rebuild and optimise soil quality, and the benefits to air, water, ecosystem, food, animal welfare and human health are downstream results of the optimisation." End quote. And that's from a piece entitled, not surprisingly, Regenerative Farming, One Solution That Solves Many Problems. And this is the sort of thing we need to focus on. One change with huge downstream benefits. So rather than making people use thicker plastic bags rather than single-use bags, both made from petrochemicals, rejig the plastic manufacturing system so that the inputs are cellulose-based rather than fossil fuels. If this requires legislation, then so be it. That way, when the bag breaks down and returns nutrients to the soil, there's no fish being strangled or turtles topping themselves by having stomachs full of plastic. So rather than blaming the individual consumers for not changing the world, let's apply pressure to the root causes of these problems. CAFOs replaced with Regen ag, electric vehicles replacing petrol diesel ones, and hemp-based paper instead of pine pulp, just to kick off a few ideas. We can do this. We need to do this. Those 12 years to take action that we were told about back in October 2018? Well, we're now down to 11 years, 7 months, and the clock is ticking. Let's get this sorted, people. This is beyond left and right of this is beyond left-right politics. This is universal. If you have an election where you live in the next little while, raise the issue. Give them hell. Make things change. We must do this. Probably yesterday, but today and tomorrow and the day after that, we can do this. And on that note, I'll draw this episode to a conclusion. Remember, decarbonise the air, recarbonise the soil. The podcasting checklists are still available over at John Moore Podcasting Services. And thanks for listening, and I'll be back next week.